I will then, from down here, introduce our second commentator. As I've said, she is a graduate of the University of Graz, Beate Treml, and she is not only that. At the moment she is pursuing a master's degree in gender studies, but also she has taken up the research in quality assurance in higher education, and a little bit from the student's perspective, and that will be maybe an interesting angle, because I think your ranking I found interesting, because as I remember, in the late 80s and 90s, Dutch evaluation systems of higher education were actually only driven by student placement. So you had to prove that your students could get a job and hold a job on the market. That was one of the major indicators that was applied, and now we see a completely different kind of ranking system merging here. So please, let us have your comments.
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Costas Comesania, dear Professor Bischoff, dear audience. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the international lectures today for this event, and moreover for our fruitful cooperation in this whole project. It's a great honor for me to have the opportunity to bring up the students' view on rankings today, especially here at my own alma mater. I will probably be the most critical one amongst today's speakers, and maybe get the whole thing back to the question of, do we actually really need rankings at all? So when preparing for today, I first remembered the European Students' Union's policy paper on quality of higher education. This document states, with regard to rankings, these tools undermine trust between higher education institutions, affecting the cooperation, recognition, and mobility between them. Ultimately, the reputation of a higher education institution could have a large effect on graduates' employment opportunities and affect student choice. It will enact greater elitism by increasing selectivity and exacerbating the social divide of the student body. These tools will allow for the concentration of funding in some higher education institutions, making rich institutions richer and poor institutions poorer. I could actually more or less leave it with that, but I would like to elaborate on some aspects of our criticism. First, I would like to draw your attention to the indicators rankings are based on. Most of them mainly or even exclusively focus on research. When looking at the already mentioned Shanghai ranking, we see that it is mainly based on the publication activity and reputation of the institution's scientific stuff. Even if we assume that the indicators used are suitable to evaluate the criteria in question, in how far can we draw any relevant conclusion about the quality of teaching and learning from them? What's the use of a professor who publishes in Nature or Science every other year if he or she doesn't care at all about how to convey their knowledge and skills to first-year students? What's the use of having a Nobel laureate as a teacher if they are always traveling, giving talks all over the world, and their students end up barely ever seeing them? Rankings like the presented New Leiden ranking may give some impression of the international English-speaking relevance of the research a university conducts, but not necessarily of its quality. And they definitely cannot assess the quality of a higher education institution, which should, today more than ever, be committed to the unity of teaching and research. Rankings that completely deny one of the two functions of the universities cannot be taken into account when it comes to evaluating institutions' performances. And for sure, they cannot be the base for the allocation of public funding for higher education. Secondly, I would like to talk about the question of transparency and stakeholder involvement when it comes to rankings. Most of the rankings we heard about today are published by privately financed research institutions, or even worse, publishing companies, like it is the case for the Times Higher Education ranking or the CHE ranking in Germany. And those few, like the Leiden ranking, that are published by researchers still lack transparent ways of designing them and involvement of all the stakeholders concerned. If we want to facilitate cooperation, mobility, and internationalization, the use of transparent tools is a necessity. And we already have these tools, like for instance when it comes to quality assurance in the European higher education area. From a student's point of view, this system of quality assurance, of course, is not just happiness and bright sunshine, but at least those regulations, procedures, and developments are dedicated to enhance institutions' quality with respect to students' needs, instead of putting institutions under pressure by assessing their quality with some obscure research indicators. Those tools are part of a bigger international cooperation that attracts more and more interest beyond its borders, because of its success in both enhancing development and providing a means of comparison. With the society's issues today, it is absolutely clear that it is not competition for financial resources by competition for the highest positions in rankings, but cooperation that will take us further and will bring us closer together. The third aspect that I would like to talk about is the impact rankings have on research and education. Rankings are part and driver of the commodification of education and research. From a student's point of view, it is absolutely clear that education has to remain a public good. Rankings try to make us believe that competitiveness in a homogeneous scientific community automatically also implies high-quality education and research. But scientific quality cannot be measured by quantitative methods, and education cannot be turned into a tradable good. Of course, scientists and researchers are competing with their ideas, but this competition is not a competition in economic terms. Higher education institutions are not enterprises, and because of this, they must not adjust their activities to maximizing profits and increasing efficiency. If rankings can measure anything, then it is this market orientation of institutions. But for higher education, they should be more or less irrelevant. Today, with an increasing lack of funding, rankings mainly have negative impact on institutions, research, and students. Institutions are more and more pushed into competition. Research is more and more being narrowed down to questions that suit the zeitgeist of the scientific community, because thinking outside the box might not be publishable in Nature or Science. And students are more and more being forced to pay for education at a highly ranked institution in order to obtain a degree that allows them to find a job, based not on the quality of their actual education, but on the reputation of the institution, leaving those behind who cannot afford paying high tuition fees and do not want to take the risk of burying themselves in debt. So, to conclude my thoughts, the underlying question that we have to answer before talking about the necessity and merits of rankings is as follows. Do we want and need highly competitive research institutions that educate a small elite? Or do we prefer higher education institutions that are truly committed to contribute to finding solutions for some of today's burning issues by providing high-quality education for a broad and diverse student body? Thank you.